What happens when Hollywood's most unstoppable force walks into a morning show studio expecting a lighthearted chat and finds himself facing a hidden agenda? You're about to witness it. And no, not even the Terminator saw this coming. So before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because what unfolds is not just wild, it's downright legendary. It was supposed to be a simple promo stop. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the bodybuilding icon turned Hollywood megastar turned governor of California, had agreed to appear on Good Morning America to discuss his latest project, a gritty, character-driven action film with a surprisingly emotional core. At 77, Arnold was still larger than life, not just physically, but as a symbol. His mere presence in a TV studio still sparked electricity. Network executives were ecstatic. After all, Schwarzenegger didn't just do interviews anymore. He made appearances. The plan was simple: a brief retrospective of his blockbuster-filled career, some laughs about his early accent troubles, reflections on his time as governor, and finally a sneak peek at the new film. The producers even had a dramatic montage ready. Shots of Conan swinging a sword, the Terminator walking through fire, John Matrix holding a rocket launcher, and that famous growled line, "I'll be back." But from the moment Arnold entered the studio, something felt off. He walked in with his trademark confident stride, a tailored gray blazer stretched over his broad shoulders, sunglasses in one hand and a smile playing on his lips. He gave a quick wave to the audience, flashing that famous grin that had disarmed moviegoers and political opponents alike. But behind that grin, he sensed it. The air felt too rehearsed, too polite, too loaded. The legendary Austrian oak took his seat with practiced ease, radiating that mix of charm, strength, and absolute control he had mastered over the decades. He scanned the studio with a casual glance, like a general taking in the battlefield. Not with suspicion, but with the calm of someone who'd seen a few wars already. He adjusted his blazer, smoothed it down with a wink at the camera crew, and then locked eyes with the host across from him. "Good morning, Arnold," Stephanopoulos said, flashing his well-rehearsed smile. "Thanks for being with us." Arnold returned the smile, his accent as unmistakable as ever. "Always a pleasure to wake up America, George, unless you were expecting someone quieter." The audience chuckled. The opening was smooth, the tone light. The first few minutes went by as expected. Stephanopoulos asked about the film, a return to gritty action with a strong emotional undercurrent. And Arnold responded with natural charisma. He praised his co-stars, joked about doing his own stunts. "My niece filed a complaint, but we settled out of court," and reflected thoughtfully on what storytelling meant to him after all these years. Everything was going according to plan, until it wasn't. Then, Stephanopoulos' tone subtly shifted. "Arnold, you've been a part of this industry for a very long time," he said, leaning forward ever so slightly. "You've witnessed firsthand how Hollywood has evolved, particularly in terms of representation, diversity, social awareness. How do you feel about those changes?" Arnold's smile didn't disappear, but it froze. His eyes locked onto Stephanopoulos with the focus of a man who once held political office, who'd debated real opponents on real stages, and who'd been underestimated many times before. He leaned back, arms casually crossing that still broad chest. "That's a funny question, George," he said slowly, "because I thought we were here to talk about a movie, not rewrite the Constitution of Hollywood on live TV." There was a flicker of laughter in his voice, but behind it something else. "Stio, but since you brought it up," he looked directly into the camera, then back at the host. "A good story is a good story, whether it comes from a man, a woman, someone from Austria, or Mars. I've always believed in strength, of character, of will, of performance, and I hire the best people. Period. Not because of labels, because they can deliver." Stephanopoulos didn't back down. "But surely," he said, with a hint of insistence, "you recognize that the industry had systemic issues that needed change." Arnold's expression didn't shift, but the temperature in the room did. He uncrossed his arms, leaned slightly forward, and dropped his voice just enough to make the room go quiet. George, I came from a system. It was called post-war Austria. I know what real systemic struggle looks like. You want change? You don't whine about it. You show up. You outwork everyone. You become undeniable. That's what I did. That's what I still do. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. The air in the studio shifted, not visibly, but in that subtle way that only happens when someone realizes they may have underestimated their guest. Arnold's grin faded. His Austrian accented baritone now carried less charm, more clarity. He tilted his head slightly, then spoke, not louder but heavier. You know, George, filmmaking, real filmmaking, has always been about telling honest stories, about human beings, not slogans. When you inject too much politics into it, you don't get art, you get advertising with a moral checklist. The audience rustled uncomfortably. This wasn't the pump iron, crack jokes, promote a film version of Schwarzenegger they were expecting. This was something else, something raw, more direct. Stephanopoulos leaned in, sensing, wrongly, that he was gaining ground. But Arnold, isn't it also political to ignore these issues? To pretend that representation doesn't matter? Arnold didn't blink. He simply leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. I'm not pretending anything, George. I'm saying this. When your first question on set is what boxes do we need to check instead of what truth are we trying to tell, then you're not making a movie anymore. You're writing a press release with actors. A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the cameramen glanced at the control booth. Should they cut to commercial? The answer was unclear. Stephanopoulos forced a smile. Some might say that's easy to say when you've never had to worry about representation. That's a position of privilege. Arnold's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in disbelief, and when he spoke, his voice was sharp, like a chisel cracking concrete. Privilege? You think it was privilege coming to this country after 21 with a suitcase and 20 in my pocket? Not knowing the language? Being laughed at because of my name, my accent, my body? I was a walking punchline until I made myself undeniable. He sat up straighter, no longer playing nice. I worked construction during the day, took acting classes at night. I built my life rep by rep, audition by audition. No one handed me anything. If you call that privilege, then maybe we need a new dictionary. But Stephanopoulos kept going, seemingly unaware that he was now sparring with a different kind of heavyweight. But surely you have to admit, the industry was different then. Opportunities weren't equally available to everyone. Arnold let out a short, dry laugh, not amused but tired of the script. Of course it was different. It was brutal. I got rejected 100 times, not because I was a man, not because I was white, because I was also weird, too big, too foreign, too much accent, too much everything. He pointed gently towards Stephanopoulos. But I didn't complain. I adapted, I improved, and I never asked anyone to lower the bar for me. The studio was now dead quiet. The morning show had taken a turn, and Arnold wasn't backing down. Opportunities weren't equally available to everyone, Stephanopoulos pressed, his tone tightening. Arnold didn't blink. He adjusted his posture, fingers interlocked, voice low but resolute. George, opportunity never knocks on every door at the same time. It's not supposed to. That's the myth. The truth? It knocks louder for the people who build their own doors. The control room was a flurry of muted chaos. Producers leaned over one another, whispering furiously. Should they step in, cut to weather, or let the fireworks roll? Arnold continued, now leaning forward, the studio lights catching the intensity in his eyes. I spent years being rejected, told I was too bulky, too foreign, too weird. I took background roles. I dubbed over my own lines. I worked for next to nothing. And not once did I think this is unfair because of what I am. I thought, okay, I'm not there yet. Time to work harder. The room felt tighter now, the air heavier. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a clash of philosophies. I think you're missing the point, Stephanopoulos said, his carefully crafted poise beginning to fray at the edges. The system itself was biased. Arnold raised an eyebrow. Biased? No. Brutal? Absolutely. But there's a difference between something being hard and something being unfair. His voice dropped into that unmistakable, commanding rhythm, the one that once held political rallies and film sets in silence. Life isn't therapy, and movies aren't group hugs. You don't get a standing ovation just for showing up. You have to earn it, with sweat, with failure, with fire. Stephanopoulos' face reddened slightly. So you don't think there were barriers? He asked, grasping at the argument like a lifeline. Arnold nodded slowly. There are always barriers, George, always. The question is, do you let them define you, or do you smash through them like a wrecking ball? He leaned back again, calm but not passive. This wasn't anger. This was confidence forged in rejection, in discipline, in war rooms and gym floors. And now the gloves were off. Stephanopoulos narrowed his eyes, voice sharpening. But Arnold, surely you can acknowledge that your generation of filmmakers had advantages that others didn't. Arnold didn't speak for a moment. He simply looked at him, not with fury, but with something more unnerving, understanding, and then defiance. My generation? You mean the one that had to prove itself every time? The one that built this industry with nothing but drive and vision? I wasn't born into Hollywood, George. I broke into it with an accent, with a name nobody could pronounce, and with a body everyone thought was a joke. So if that's what you call an advantage, maybe you need to redefine the word. Stephanopoulos' voice had become even sharper now. The old boy network, the exclusionary practices. You know what I mean. Arnold's face changed. The smile was gone. In its place was a stony expression. The cameras remained fixed. The crew members were no longer witnessing the scene, but the story. Arnold leaned back slowly, placing one hand on the table and the other on the chair. He fixed his gaze on Stephanopoulos, like a Terminator scanning a target. You're talking about my generation? The one that came here with nothing? That built businesses, careers, entire communities from scratch? The one that didn't inherit success but earned it? Yeah, I'm proud of that generation. Stephanopoulos retorted, now completely shedding his journalistic mask. I mean the generation that controlled Hollywood while others were kept out. A silence fell. The cameramen had stopped. The producers held their breath. The studio was locked down. Arnold's voice came out this time, low but firm. George, I think you've got me confused with someone else. I didn't control Hollywood. I broke into it with a thick accent, a strange name, and a body nobody knew what to do with. And once I made it in, I didn't pull up the ladder. I extended it. Stephanopoulos shifted from defensive mode to offensive mode. That's easy to say now, but the record speaks for itself. How many of your films had diverse casts? How many female directors did you push forward? Arnold stared unblinkingly. He placed his hands on the arms of his chair. His body was still, but his energy was ready to explode. The record? You want to talk about the record? He took a deep breath, drawing the words out with weight. I made films about underdogs, immigrants, warriors, machines that learned to be human. I brought international actors into mainstream franchises. I worked with directors from all walks of life. But no, I didn't walk around with a clipboard checking identity boxes. I hired people because they were great, not because it would win me applause. Stephanopoulos lashed out. So you admit that diversity wasn't your priority? Arnold's voice now rose noticeably for the first time. Tough, but still self-possessed. I admit that great storytelling was my priority, always. That's what endures. That's what audiences pay for. You want diversity? I gave people heroes from every corner of the world. I showed struggles that cross race, gender, country. You call that narrow? You're not paying attention. Stephanopoulos responded again, this time in a more personal tone. But you showed it from a very specific perspective. Arnold leaned forward, his body heavy but determined, cast a shadow over the presenter. Yeah, my perspective. The perspective of a man who came from nothing, who failed more than he succeeded, who was never the safe choice, and maybe that's why it worked, because it was real. The perspective of white male conservative America, Stephanopoulos declared. That was it. The line had been crossed. Arnold's nostrils flared slightly, not rage, clarity. He sat there for a second, perfectly still, then slowly, deliberately, leaned forward. Conservative America, he repeated, voice edged in granite. Is that what you call a kid from post-war Austria who couldn't speak English? Pumping iron in Venice Beach, dreaming of a better life? His voice wasn't shouting, it didn't need to. Every syllable landed like a dumbbell dropped on marble. You think Kindergarten Cop was a political statement? You think Maggie, a movie about a father watching his daughter die, was some right-wing fantasy? You haven't been watching. Stephanopoulos waved it off. Those are exceptions. Your body of work pushes a very specific worldview. Arnold stood up slowly, his full height casting a long shadow over the seated host. He looked down, not in condescension, but like a builder evaluating a crooked foundation. My worldview? You mean the idea that people should work for what they want? That discipline builds character? That protecting your family is a noble thing? If that's controversial to you, George, then I don't think I'm the one with the problem. Inside the control room, alarms might as well have been going off. This was not the breakfast segment they had planned. The crew was frozen. The audience held their breath. The only sound was the soft hum of the cameras, capturing one of the most unexpected showdowns in live television. But Stephanopoulos wasn't done. He pressed on, clinging to his line of attack. Don't you think your films promote certain stereotypes? About masculinity, about violence being the answer? Arnold turned back slowly. He planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and looked Stephanopoulos dead in the eye. Stereotypes? You want to talk about stereotypes? His voice dropped in volume, but grew in intensity. How about the one where anyone who doesn't follow your script gets labeled racist, sexist, toxic, whatever trendy insult is fashionable this week? He took a step forward, not aggressively, but with the weight of presence. You look at a man who built his life through pain and repetition, who bled for every inch of success, and say he's the problem because he doesn't talk like a college syllabus. Stephanopoulos blinked, just briefly, caught off guard by the rawness of the challenge. I'm just asking questions about your work and its impact, he said, his tone defensive now. Arnold didn't blink. He stepped slightly aside and gestured broadly with both hands, palms up, like a man who had nothing to hide. And I'm answering, you just don't like the answers. He paused, voice calm but booming. Impact? I've inspired people to chase greatness, to transform their bodies, their minds, their lives. I've shown that strength isn't just muscles. It's sacrifice, purpose, and belief. No, you're not, Arnold said, his voice now resonating with decades of earned authority, from Hollywood to the governor's mansion. You're not here for a thoughtful discussion. You're here to set a trap. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You invited me under false pretenses, said we'd talk about my film, about storytelling, cinema, legacy. Instead, you're treating me like a defendant, as if the crime is making movies that people actually love to watch. He turned slightly toward the audience, arms open, brows lifted. Imagine that, the horror, being successful. Stephanopoulos tried to seize the moment. I think you're being a little overly sensitive, Arnold, he said, attempting to regain control of the spiraling interview. Arnold let out a short, low chuckle, not amused but warning. Sensitive, George? I've stood on bodybuilding stages while people booed. I've faced political press conferences where the questions made this look like kindergarten. I've been ripped apart by critics from Los Angeles to Vienna, and not once did I fold. He leaned in slightly, and his voice took on an unmistakable weight. But you're not asking questions, you're prosecuting, and you're doing it badly. Stephanopoulos fidgeted in his seat, his confidence beginning to crack. That's not what I'm doing, he protested. Arnold pointed gently at him, but with unmistakable strength. That's exactly what you're doing. You want to talk politics? Let's do it. I've run a state bigger than most countries. I've signed bills, vetoed budgets, faced protesters, reformed systems. His voice rose slightly, not in anger, in command. But don't dress this up as a career retrospective. Don't pretend it's journalism when what you're really after is a soundbite. Stephanopoulos flushed red, no longer the composed anchor, but a man losing control of the script. I'm trying to have a thoughtful conversation about important issues, he insisted. Arnold shook his head slowly, eyes locked on the host. No, you're trying to create a moment, something viral, something you can post with a headline. Schwarzenegger says something controversial about Hollywood. You don't care about insight, you care about engagement. The studio was now holding its collective breath. You could hear the quiet hum of the air vents, the faint click of a nervous producer's pen, the almost inaudible whir of a camera lens adjusting focus. Even the audience was still, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or just watch history happen. I think you are misunderstanding my intentions, Stephanopoulos said weakly, his voice now void of the confidence he'd begun with. Arnold took one step closer, his voice low but crystal clear. No misunderstanding here, George. Your intentions are about as clear as a protein shake in a glass blender. You didn't invite me to talk. You invited me to be your villain. He motioned to the cameras with a half smile, not amused but unimpressed. Well, congratulations. You got your confrontation. Hope the ratings were worth it. Stephanopoulos opened his mouth, the heat rising in his face. His ego, now cornered, refused to back down. You know what, Arnold, he snapped, abandoning any pretense of professionalism. Maybe the real problem is that you can't handle being questioned. Maybe you're not used to someone actually challenging your outdated views. Silence. The words dropped between them like a steel bar on concrete. Arnold stood completely still. His voice, when it came, was almost gentle, and that made it all the more chilling. Outdated views? He repeated, his Austrian accent sharpening every syllable like a blade. A beat of silence. Let me tell you something, George. I believe in treating people with dignity, not hashtags. I believe respect is something you earn, not something you demand because you check a box. He stepped slightly forward again, not threatening, but commanding. And I believe in stories, real ones, the kind that come from sweat, from scars, from life. If that's outdated, then I'm happy to be called a dinosaur. The studio was dead still. Even the boom mic operator had stopped moving. But Stephanopoulos, now completely disconnected from the moment, pushed forward blindly. But don't you think audiences today want more complexity? More nuance than the simplistic morality in your old films? Arnold actually laughed. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was short, sharp, and bitter. Complexity, he echoed, eyes narrowing. He took a slow step to the side, and pacing now, like a general mid-briefing. I made movies about killers who learned humanity, about machines that learned to love, about immigrants who built empires. I played flawed heroes, selfish fathers, corrupted politicians, men who broke and rebuilt themselves. He turned to Stephanopoulos, voice low again. You think it's simple just because it's powerful. That's your mistake. He raised one finger slowly. And don't confuse subtlety with weakness. Just because my characters don't cry on cue doesn't mean they don't feel pain. I made movies about the cost of violence, Arnold said, stepping forward once more, his voice a controlled fire. About the burden of leadership, about the price of redemption. But none of that matters to you, right? He shook his head slowly, the light bouncing off his features like in a close-up from one of his films. Because I didn't check the right political boxes. Stephanopoulos raised his voice slightly, emboldened by his own stubbornness, rather than any sense of truth. Those themes were always secondary to the main narrative. Your films primarily celebrate a certain kind of masculine heroism that people today find problematic. Arnold blinked once, and then tilted his head, the smile that followed bone-dry sarcasm. Problematic. There's that word again. He stepped forward, now directly facing the host. No barrier, no smile, just truth. You people think everything is problematic. Working hard, problematic. Taking responsibility for your mistakes, problematic. Fighting to protect your family, definitely problematic. The audience said nothing. The crew said nothing. Even the producers had stopped breathing. It was just Arnold. and George, and 100,000 watching eyes. I'm not saying those things are wrong, Stephanopoulos said, his voice suddenly smaller. I'm just saying your films present them in a way that excludes other perspectives. Arnold stared at him. Other voices, he said slowly. George, I've been making movies for over 5 decades. I've worked with people from every background you can imagine, every language, every continent. He raised a hand, palm open, as if presenting evidence the host had willfully ignored. I've lived with other voices. I am another voice. His tone now dipped into steel. Again, but because I don't hold a press conference, every time I cast someone outside the Hollywood algorithm, it doesn't count? Stephanopoulos pressed on, the last drops of his self-importance spilling over. But you have to admit your influence shaped Hollywood in ways that weren't always positive. That did it. Arnold inhaled slowly, and when he spoke, it was no longer just a rebuttal. It was a roar of legacy. My influence? His voice boomed through the set, bouncing off the studio walls like a thunderclap. You want to talk about my influence, George? He took 2 steps forward, not aggressively, but purposefully. I helped create a generation of cinema that believed in more than just applause. I showed the world that a man with a name no one could pronounce could become a global icon, that stories could be entertaining and meaningful, that you could teach values without preaching politics. He pointed now, not at George, but toward the camera. And yes, I made money doing it, because that's how movies get made. You think principles exist without paychecks? Try feeding a crew of 200 on idealism. Stephanopoulos tried to say something, but Arnold wouldn't stop now. Years of accumulated frustration, pent-up exhaustion, and exhaustion were now pouring into his sentences like fire, measured but firm. And more than that, Arnold continued, his voice now filling the hall completely. I've employed thousands, actors, writers, directors, stunt teams, set designers, carpenters, electricians, real people. He raised his hand without making a fist, his words becoming emphatic. I've created jobs. I've built careers. I've given chances to people the system didn't even notice, not because of what they looked like, but because of what they could do. Stephanopoulos interjected in a whisper, I understand that. Arnold turned abruptly, his eyes were now blazing. No, you don't understand. His tone still wasn't shouting, but it was sharp enough to crack the walls. You don't know what it means to bet everything, your money, your name, your reputation on a story. You don't know what it feels like to look your crew in the eye and tell them we ran out of funding, or that the studio pulled out, or that the dream is dead before the first camera even rolls. Stephanopoulos shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His expression had now turned into an uncontrolled defensiveness. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's held Hollywood back, he said, his voice cracking with stubbornness. This obsession with profit over principles. Arnold froze at first. Then he just stared. Finally, he broke his silence, but his voice was filled not with sarcasm, but with reality. Profit over principles? George, without profit, there is no art. At that moment, even the cameras seemed to stop for a few seconds. Arnold continued, this time turning toward the camera, because his message wasn't just for Stephanopoulos, but for everyone. No profit means no lights, no sets, no actors, no crew, no food on the table, no opportunities, no second chances, nothing. You can have all the principles in the world, but if no one's watching, you're not making change. You're making noise. Stephanopoulos was still struggling. But surely, should art be about more than just commercial appeal? Arnold narrowed his eyes. Now it was quieter but more effective. Of course it should, but only if it reaches someone. And to reach them, it has to be seen. And to be seen, someone has to pay for it. Art? Stephanopoulos snapped, hoping for a last-ditch defense. Shouldn't art be about more than just commercialism? Arnold's expression changed, not with sarcasm, not with resentment, just like that moment when something became clear. Real, open disappointment. You want to lecture me about art? I've been making movies longer than you've been shaving, George. He took a step, shoulders squared, hands open. Real art. Art that moves people. Art that lifts them off the floor after life knocks them down. Not this self-congratulatory elitist garbage that gets clapped for in a theater nobody even filled. Arnold's presence no longer overwhelms the studio. On the contrary, it illuminates it. But the light, burning. Stephanopoulos struggled, as if trying to escape from a tightrope. Look, I think we're getting off track here. I'm just trying to have an honest conversation about your career, about your impact on culture. Arnold's laugh came, harsh, dry, short. Honest? There's nothing honest about this ambush. The break in his voice wasn't anger, it was determination and clarity. You invited me here to talk about a film I spent 2 years making, to talk about characters, meaning, craft. Instead, you turned this into a courtroom, and me into your target. Stephanopoulos rose. I resent that characterization. Arnold took another step, not to speak, to finish. Resent it all you want, but that's what it is. You came here with your verdict already written. You just needed me to say something you could use as the headline. Now even silence followed him. You think I don't know this game? I've seen more sets than you've seen sunrises. And you didn't come here for a conversation. You came here for a gotcha. And when I didn't give it to you, you went for the kill. Everyone in the studio was holding their breath now. Stephanopoulos, with one final outburst, I think you're being unfair. Arnold leaned in a little. His eyes were still on him, but now they were shun, not angry. You want to know what's unfair, George? He pressed his lips together. Then raising his fingers one by one, he spoke. What's unfair is bringing someone on your show and then trying to discredit everything they have worked for. What's unfair is using your chair not to ask questions, but to prosecute a legacy. What's unfair is pretending this is journalism when it's not. He paused. His gaze remained fixed. But you know what? I'm done. His voice softened, but his influence grew. I came here to talk about what I love, filmmaking, telling stories, creating something that matters. But this wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks their Twitter feed is more valuable than 50 years of experience in this business. Arnold slowly reached out his hand and began untangling his microphone. Every movement was practiced, quiet, and determined. A silence that spoke not of a man about to rise, but of an era about to end. Wait, Stephanopoulos panicked. Arnold, we're not finished here. Arnold looked up. His gaze was cold, clear. It was like the final word. Oh, we're finished, all right. He stood, his shirt straightened, his presence hung over the studio like a weight, not a shadow. I don't have to sit here and let you disrespect me, or my work, or the thousands of people I've worked with. I've stood on sets where it rained budget cuts and chaos, and still we created art. He let out a breath. He slowly let go of the microphone and dropped it onto the chair. A deep thud echoed through the studio. I've been in front of live crowds, live cameras, and live fire. And let me tell you something. This isn't journalism. This is a performance. And you're not ready for the sequel. Stephanopoulos still clung to hope. But this is live television. You can't just walk off. Arnold turned to the camera. With his legendary presence, he began speaking directly to millions. Watch me. A momentary pause. Folks, I came here to talk about filmmaking, about craft, about the magic of storytelling, the kind that moves you, challenges you, lifts you. But instead, I walked into a trap. One dressed in polite words and disguised as discussion. Stephanopoulos was about to say something, but Arnold simply silenced him with his eyes. And everyone understood what those eyes meant. I've spent my entire life building stories people can believe in. Not perfect stories, but real ones. If that's not enough for some people, if it doesn't check their boxes, that's not all my problem, that's theirs. And then, he said nothing. He just walked. Slow, rhythmic, upright. Every step was like an echo of the past. Every step announced that a legend had left his stage by choice. The cameras were still rolling. The sound desk was still on. But the entire studio was frozen. Stephanopoulos was left alone at the table. His face was red. He didn't know where to put his hands. His eyes searched for help, but no one looked. The producers bowed their heads. The cameramen remained motionless. And in that moment, only the truth remained. George Stephanopoulos tried to outsmart a Hollywood icon, but he only succeeded in diminishing himself. This morning show has now become television history, and there's one truth everyone agrees on. Arnold won, quietly, proudly, unquestionably.